Okay, my name's Barbara Boyd, uh, and this is the LaRouche PAC strategic briefing. I'm joined tonight by Bruce Director, and I'm gonna start with a very short sort of cold open, and then we're gonna talk back and forth about the nature of religious warfare and how to stop it. So it's kind of an important dialogue we're gonna have here tonight. Many of you and ourselves are very much focused on the battle which is right now going on in the Congress of the United States. Some people over the weekend got demoralized because Jim Jordan, who was an obvious choice for Speaker, seemed to have lost as the DC corrupt crowd really dug in their heels and realized that they were really on the edge of a huge strategic defeat. Largely caused by you guys, the people out there in this audience and beyond in the MAGA movement. Now is not the time to get demoralized or freaked out. You got to think about the fact that we are in a new American Revolution. That's the nature of this thing. We are changing things preparatory to bringing Donald Trump back into office in 2024. And so far, we have sustained a lot of hits from everything they can throw at us. And yet, having sustained all those hits, if you look at the polls, American people are joining us in this fight in droves. So we've got to be very, very clear about the different strategic stakes in this thing. And we've got to be very, very clear, particularly about issues of war and peace, which unfortunately we're in the middle of a decision on among the American people and the world throughout the coming days. If you look at the Biden side of the equation, it is literally insane. He intends to put before the Congress this week a proposal for new funding in the billions and billions of dollars for Ukraine, for funding for Israel, which will involve us directly, relatively, in whatever Israel does in the present situation. The funding encompasses funding for fueling for Israeli jets, subsistence for the Iron Dome, intelligence and other forms of assistance in terms of, what's going to happen as this overall offensive of Israel takes place, and much, much, much beyond the simple deterrence, which we should be doing to try and get this thing under control. Now, a lot of people think the war is just a foregone conclusion. It is going to happen, and there's nothing I can really do about it. I'm here tonight to tell you that that's not true. Imagine, if you will, how the various people in the world are looking at the United States at this point. They hear a president who is literally nuts, talking about, we're the American, we're the United States of America, we can fight a two-front war. That is absolute nonsense. And if we continue as we're continuing in Ukraine and now get involved in Israel in an actual two-front war, what is likely to happen is the United States will be defeated and the world will suffer casualties beyond comparison of anything in your lifetime. If, on the other hand, the world is looking at the United States, and instead of hearing, we're ready to go with Iran from the Republican Party, a holdover from the Bush administration and the Bushies and that entire, sort of attitude towards the Middle East, then essentially, yeah, if we accept that, then the war becomes a foregone sort of conclusion. But if the United States is in revolt on the right basis and is saying to the Congress this week, no money for war, period. No more money for war, period. And is saying to Biden the way he thinks he's sweetening this deal to send us into, a kind of new Holocaust, if you will. The way he thinks he's sweetening it is by having some form of border security in his package. The border security that he's talking about is simply for resettlement of ever more people, keeping the border open, And, a little bit of money, 1.8 billion of that is for fentanyl interdiction. It's all a big phony game. And our answer to it is real simple: close the damn border at this point. We're in a major national security situation. There are terrorists which are coming and have come across the border. We are open now for a terrorist incident in the United States because of this idiot's policies, which could further destabilize everything that we're fighting for, needless to say. So if the citizens of the United States are actually saying something very different than that stupid message, and is actually getting aligned with the types of foreign policy things which Donald Trump did, we're in a different universe. Now, the war can be stopped if the United States is participating with Russia and China on a unified message to everybody in the region, and that is cut it out. Let's have some form of ceasefire. Let's have some form of actual peace in the area. Let's end terrorism in the area as a method of surrogate warfare by nation states, which is what all of this religious warfare is and has been. It has a history to it. And it's a history which you've got to get to know at this point because it's very, very important for your survival. I will point out that if you compare the situation before Trump, Saudi Arabia was a sponsor of state terrorism. Comparatively, after Trump and the wonderful Abraham Accords, which he put together to actually bring peace and stability to the region, the former head of Saudi intelligence, Turki al-Ban Faisal, has come out with a statement essentially condemning Hamas, condemning violence as a means to solve these issues in the Middle East in general, saying that terrorism shouldn't be the answer here, and that the actual answer for those concerned about an actual peace with Israel and concerned about any deprecations by Israel should be the same type of response which the Indians had to the British Empire, i.e., peaceful resistance, the type of resistance which draws the world's attention to solving the problem rather than prolonging the problem. That's a 100-degree change. And it shows what American leadership and having a population on a different kind of, phase space, if you will, can do in terms of changing international relationships. So the answer is we've got to cause an uproar in the Congress where we're having for the first time direct participation by the citizens in actually getting things done. And it is really important that people don't say, okay, I'm disappointed, my guy didn't win. I'm disengaging from the fight at this point. We are in a war here and have been in a war here, as most people who've tried to get Trump's viewpoint across realize. And it's going to be a war in which we change the entire nature of the United States back to its true revolutionary roots as an agent of peace and development in the entire world. So Lindsey Graham, the idiot Mitch McConnell, who basically has come out supporting this type of package and supporting the idea that there is a new axis of evil, a new enemy, just like in the Bush administration's forever wars. The new axis of evil is Russia, China, and Iran. You got to basically step back from that and say, no more, we're not doing that. The American population is not doing it. I took a look today at the first year of the Trump administration foreign policy, and it's really interesting and striking when you look at it, because he recognized that we were in a war against an empire, against globalism per se. So that in the very first year of his administration, what did he do? He pulled us out of the TPP, a globalist trade agreement. He pulled us out of NAFTA, a huge and awful trade agreement, which left most of our manufacturing jobs going to Mexico, and other locations. He pulled us out of the climate accord, which of course is Joe Biden's foreign policy mandate. Biden says the most important thing in the world is climate change. But most significantly, he just ignored a great deal of the Washington consensus. How does this work that we get into this defense lobby and these special interests? Well, what happens, basically between the Pentagon and the Congress, every, 2 years or so, or year or so, is that a document is drawn up called the National Defense Authorization Act. And in it, various administrations declare what their overall strategic policy is based on a Pentagon assessment, which takes place every 4 years. Now, Trump had that same silly Pentagon assessment. In his case, the assessment was that China and Russia were the enemies, and that means, of course, that you can't talk to them or can't have any dealings with them, etc. He just accepted that and said, okay, that's what you guys are doing, but I'm doing something different. And you'll see that over and over and over again, he went completely outside of this rotten institutional consensus, what all of the experts were telling him. And most of his successes actually came because he did exactly that. When he went in 2017 to Saudi Arabia to give his first speech about his foreign policy, he chose Saudi Arabia, of all places, one would think, to actually lay out what he wanted to do. And he said, what we're going to do is what he called principled realism. That is, we recognize that there are other nation states and other, cultures in the world, and we're not out to make every single one of them in our image, something which Biden is trying to do again through this crazy democracy versus authoritarianism nonsense, and something which was the heritage of the Bush and Obama administrations, which set this entire area aflame. Now, Iran, wasn't a part of the Abraham Accords. At the time that this actually came into being, Iran was at odds with the Saudis, at odds with most of the rest of the nations of that area, because it still insisted in many respects on supporting terrorism. If you remember, I don't know, was little noticed at the time, there was a huge dispute right after Trump went to Saudi Arabia and laid out in a beautiful speech, which I have an article posted on LaRouchePAC.com about the Abraham Accords, and I put that speech in there. In his speech, what Trump said to these gathered, Arab and Islamic leaders was he recognized the greatest height of Arab culture, the greatest heights of the Arab Renaissance, and he sought to invoke in these people the most developed form of civilization which existed at various times in this sector of the world. The pyramids, the vast discoveries of Egypt in terms of mathematics and all sorts of other things. You could go on and on and on. Why do people go and visit these civilizations and the great discoveries and other things they made for all of mankind in the past? And he contrasted that with the pure barbarism of terrorism, the fact that the terrorists actually are almost medieval forces of a very, very, very dark age and a dark bestiality, whether they be the Meshuggah terrorists of radical Zionism in Israel, the kind of nonsense which exists in the settlers movement, or whether they be the horrendous terrorists of Hamas, whose brutality itself is really designed to send a signal to trigger everyone to a maximum emotional response and get them ready to engage in retributory warfare. So his vision was completely different than anything that Washington or the British, which actually controls Washington's view of foreign policy, had ever offered to this area. And it's widely recognized, even by liberals, that the Abraham Accords are the greatest foreign policy accomplishment of the United States in this area in decades. Biden has really destroyed all of that and taken us back to the horrible religious warfare, which actually has been the signature of British intelligence, of the CIA, and of others ever since the time of Zbigniew Brzezinski. And I have my colleague Bruce here because he knows this history in a little bit more detail than I do. And we thought we'd talk to you tonight a little bit before we open up the discussion about the history of religious warfare in the recent period through Zbigniew Brzezinski in this arena and the history of Israel within that. But we'd also talk to you about some of the solutions which were reached the last time mankind drifted into this horrible form of warfare directly, which was in the actual solutions which evolved out of the 30 years religious warfare in Europe. So Bruce, sort of take it away for people in terms of just, letting them know the nature of this stuff.
Well, the most important thing about religious warfare is that you have to make sure it doesn't start. Because once it starts, it's very difficult to extinguish. In fact, it's almost impossible until people get so exhausted they agree to a peace. Now, that didn't happen. That happened under Trump. Trump made sure these wars didn't start. And that's the approach you have to take. As Trump has repeatedly said, in both the with respect to both the Ukraine-Russia conflict and the current conflict, is that this never would have happened under my watch. And that was because he was committed to preventing religious war. And as Barbara indicated, religious warfare has been the signature of the British Empire, which today is global in extent, which is why it's really a globalist empire. People give it different names, the Davos Empire, the globalism, etc. But it really is all the British Empire. And as Lyndon LaRouche emphasized over and over and over again, the British Empire or the Anglo-Dutch Empire is the descendant of the Venetian Empire, which is the descendant of the Roman Empire, which is descendant of the Persian Empire and descendant of the Babylonian Empire, and so on and so forth. And the issue about empires is that it's a philosophy of man. It's not a geographical location or centered around a particular nation. It's a organization of society based on a belief that man is no different than an animal, and that you have to have a ruling oligarchy who consider themselves also as animals, be the more powerful animals who keep all the other creatures, all the other human beings under control. And you monitor and control these people, the rest of the population, through warfare, through brutality, and through the kind of evil which we're now seeing on our internet screens every night being carried out in the Middle East. And this becomes the nature of life, religious warfare. And you have to stop, you can't let it start. Now, the particular danger here is that when religious warfare gets unleashed, it can engulf, as it did in the period of religious warfares in the 17th, 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries in Europe. It can engulf a very large area and very large numbers of states and peoples. But today, this kind of warfare bears the real serious possibility of spreading internationally. And so you have not only regional religious warfare, but a global conflagration. And this has to be stopped. And here you have to give President Trump credit again, because he's the only politician, the only one who constantly is saying that Biden is driving us into World War III. And that would be a global war, World War III. That's what we're facing here. Everybody else is talking about how we're going to have a regional war. Lindsey Graham and these other lunatics saying, oh, well, we're going to bomb Iran, and this is somehow going to be a regional war. I guarantee you it will not be a regional war. So far, the conflict in Ukraine has been limited to that particular geographical area. But if you think it's really limited to that area, you're mistaken, because that has a potential to engage a conflict between Russia and NATO, which includes the United States most importantly, and to draw the United States into a war with Russia would be a world war. So if you're going to go around and say stupid things like an axis of evil between Russia, Iran, and China, and that this is our enemy, or as Biden likes to say, it's a world conflict between autocracies and democracies, or as he said at the end of last week at a fundraiser in Washington, D.C., speaking to the big money people from Wall Street who are funding the Democratic Party, he said the post-war period is now exhausted, and I'm in the process of building a new world order according to my principles, which is what? Which is a British imperial policy, one in which they dream of presiding over a world of regional wars to keep politics under control while the world is ruled by some globalist empire. That's the publicly stated position of this current president of the United States. Now, fortunately, this president of the United States, as Barbara has told you, doesn't have all the power. We have a lot of the power. But when you look, and we have to exercise that power right now, the conundrum we're in, the real difficult path we have to follow here, is that he's going to be in office unless he's impeached, and somehow Trump or some substitute will be able to be put into the presidency before January 2025. We have to somehow keep this guy and these policies in check so that we can begin to straighten out this mess when Trump returns. But the problem is not going to wait until January 2025, which is why we have to exercise the kind of effort that President Trump and some few members of Congress are doing in warning that this thing could spread. Now, as Barbara indicated, there's also how do you stop this thing? You can only stop it, as Lyndon LaRouche said, and as Trump demonstrated in his presidency, by having the great powers be on the same page and working to shut this thing down. And that cannot happen unless, in this case, unless the United States is working with Russia and China to tell all the parties in the region, fool it, we're not going to war. We're going to solve this problem based on mutual agreements to jointly oppose the kind of barbaric evil which we saw carried out in the Hamas raid in Israel. But we're not going to stop that by having a regional war between Israel and the United States and Iran, or a conflict between the United States and Russia, or even worse, a conflict between the United States and China. You know, people like to throw around the phrase peace through strength. I think it's better that we follow a policy of peace through brains. You got to use your head here. And I can tell you, if you looked at President Trump's conduct while he was president, he demonstrated how you can solve conflicts with uh, with new ideas. By, as Barbara said, ignoring the uh, experts and actually talking to people in a completely different way. We have the example of North Korea, for example, where Trump used strength, uh, uh, made it clear that the U.S. had the capability to deter North Korea from taking any military action against the United States. But he didn't just do that. He then reached out and offered a peace proposal. And that peace proposal would have made three actually personal visits with Kim Jong-un, and that could have borne fruit were not for the sabotage by his own administration. Now, you can blame Trump, as some people like to do, and say, well, he should have not appointed these people and so forth, but that's pretty naive when you look at exactly what kind of Leviathan we're up against in terms of who's controlling Washington. So when we look at history, you can learn the lesson of how this thing actually can unfold. Barbara referred to the 30 Years' War, which was a war that broke out in Central Europe, actually involved most of Europe, from 1618 to 1648. But it was really just the last 30 years of a 100-year period of warfare, religious warfare, which was unleashed by the oligarchy in reaction to the emergence of the sovereign nation states as a result of the Italian Renaissance. I'll just put in um, a pre-plug to get more understanding of the Italian Renaissance. That this Saturday, Bob Ingram is going to, I'm told, is going to start a 3-part series on the works of Dante, and he will take up in more detail and give you a sense of what the significance of a Renaissance is. It's a complete different view of man. And in fact, it's the Renaissance idea of man on which the United States Constitution and Declaration of Independence is based. The oligarchy reacted against that, and instead of this higher idea of man as being created in the image of God by virtue of man's creativity and the great inventions and the discoveries of science and art that emerged in that period, the oligarchy launched a period of religious warfare, which turned most of the population of Europe into beasts, fighting each other without really understanding what they were doing, what they were building. And so the idea of progress got replaced with the idea of barbarism. Now, Friedrich Schiller, who was the great poet and historian that we've referred to many times, was a history professor for part of his life at Yale University. And he wrote during that period a study of the history of the 30 Years' War. I did a presentation on this, I think earlier this year, in the early part of the year. And he also wrote a series of plays, which are called the Wallenstein plays, in which he presented the essential features of this history in dramatic form. And I would really urge people to read both the history of the 30 Years' War. You can reference my lectures on these and also the plays. But he makes the point at the very beginning of his history that some people call this a religious war. And if you think of it only as a religious war, you'd be mistaken, because religion was used by politicians to pursue political goals, the expansion of the Habsburg Empire, the resistance from certain parts of the Habsburg Empire, the efforts by the French to defeat the Habsburg Empire by setting what was then known as the Holy Roman Empire, which was controlled by the Habsburgs, into a brutal, destructive, barbaric war. And then what turned out to be what happened is that Central Europe basically was consumed by such destruction. I think virtually half the population of Central Europe died in this war, and France emerged as the major, as a superior power. But he says if you were to just consider it a political war, you'd also be wrong, because none of these politicians could mobilize a single soldier, a single citizen, a single peasant to fight and participate in this religious war without the employment of religion. And you see, that's what's happening now. People have taken up sides based on what they believe to be a religious belief. And ironically, none of this religious belief has anything to do with the religion that they profess to believe in. It is not characteristic of Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, the kind of barbarism which is being unleashed right now. That is a characteristic of oligarchism, turning people against each other. And as I said at the beginning, this, unlike the 30 Years' War, which engulfed Central Europe, this threatens to engulf the entire world. Now, some people think you can stop this with a peace movement. We all get together and say, let's not have war, let's just have peace. Let's have ceasefires and all have peace. That is naive, because once this kind of thing gets ignited, you can only stop it as it was stopped at the end of in 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia, where people agreed to a different view, a different approach towards how they recognize how they recognize their relations, which has to be based, as the Treaty of Westphalia said, based on the conducting one's respect for national sovereignty and operating on the basis of the benefit of the other. In today's world, I would say that's the equivalent of Trump's concept of putting America first and committing himself to national sovereignty. In that respect, I would refer you to Trump's first speech at the United Nations, where he said exactly that. I'm going to put America first, you put your country first, and as long as we're doing that, we can then negotiate as to what is in the mutual benefit of each other to have some way to participate. And if you look at the policy he pursued with respect to, say, China or Russia, he was at the same time very strong and tough about those things that those countries were doing, which he believed infringed on the interests of the United States. But at the same time, he took into account the what they needed and how this could be mutually worked out. And he said he said he could solve the Ukraine crisis in a day, and it never would have happened because he would have gone to both sides and said, you're not going to get what you want, but you're going to get what's good, and worked out a deal. That's what Barbara referred to as pragmatic, principled realism. And when you look at the history of the 20th century, you can see that all efforts to implement that kind of policy, which in my opinion can only be implemented if it's led by the United States in cooperation with these other countries. LaRouche proposed a four-power agreement, especially between the United States, Russia, China, and India. And I think India needs to be brought into this because they have tremendous influence here. And these countries all have different interests. They have different traditions. They have different cultures. They have different histories. They have different requirements. but they all have together enough power to defeat the British Empire. And with this idea of mutual respect for national sovereignty and seeking to come up with mutually beneficial uh, uh, agreements, the British Empire can be defeated. Now, just one more historical example to set the tone for the discussion. Um, uh, Barbara mentioned this recent speech by Turki Al-Faisal, in which he said that we have to have an approach like the Palestinians have to approach things like the way the Indians did in their effort to free themselves from the British. Well, this is a very good example because, yes, Gandhi led a nonviolent resistance to the British Empire, and he was able to succeed not simply because it was nonviolent, but because of a lot of other factors, which are quite complex to go into here. A success in freeing, getting the British out of India and establishing national sovereignty. The British left, but they didn't completely leave. What did they leave behind? Religious warfare. You had the division even within the Quit India movement, of which Gandhi was the leader, of the seeds of the ability for the British to really maintain control over India and over the subcontinent by the Hindu-Muslim split, which was already ripping apart the Quit India movement. And that was led to the establishment of the partition between Pakistan and India, East and West Pakistan, which East Pakistan later became Bangladesh. But the religious warfare didn't end. It continued, and it continued to prevent India from realizing its true independence. And this also had implications all throughout the current area of the Middle East. So keep that in mind. If you unleash or give credence to or support the religious warfare, you are lighting a fuse that will be very hard to put out. So I think that's what I want to say. Let's have some discussion about it.